That's a rare feature on this show. I played b3 for a while way back in the day just as a way to get interesting positions. And let's say two, I want to say two jokes. Okay, first, the person who submitted this game is his handle is 1A310, implying if you play A3 on move 1, you're going to win. Well, clearly that was his old handle, and he's moved on, right? He's moved on from this square to this square, and that's the extent of his development. Now maybe we might be moving along the board. You know, we might go a C pawn, maybe we'll get to the D pawn in a couple years. Now, the next thing that I found humorous about this is that I was preparing against some kid ages ago, and I noticed that they played b3, and I turned on the computer. I was like, I know that this looks good, so let's just turn on the computer and see what they say. And the thing that kind of blew my mind was that bishop d6 was playable. It blew my mind because it seems like we're inviting f4, and there's maybe some more drama than I wanted, right? Okay, so what the computer said, though, was that black's move, f6, is correct, and I think only in a computer world would I come up with, believe it. And let me see if I'm just going to try to remember it. A3 doesn't go into it, but like the human fear, or my fear, is like snip, takes, bishop e5. And on a surface level, it's just like, oh, well, we blundered that. You know what I mean? Like, oh, that was no good. But then the computer, I do remember this now, the computer said, no, bro, look at this. Queen h4, check. Queen e4, and we got to ask ourselves who's better and why. Right? Things have shifted. Things have shifted. So that's the brutal rationalization behind f6. Now, here where it's interesting is not only does A3 know about this f6, but he had already done some prep. So this was all his prep. Queen h5, provoking g6, queen f3, and then he says that e4, queen f2 is his like preparation. And so, right, it's interesting to me that that even in b3 we've got hectic opening prep, and people are aware of f6, which to me is a very computer move, because you wouldn't, at least I wouldn't even think about playing it because of what looks to be tactics gone wrong on the e5 square. Okay, so apparently his opponent knew about this too and plays bishop e6. I agree. To me, e4 looks very pleasant for black, very pleasant, because this knight is in the way of the bishop. The knight is in the way of the c-pawn. The bishop doesn't really want to be there because it doesn't want to take anytime soon. Something like clear advantage for black. Okay, things get weird though. Queen f2, excuse me, bishop e6, probably not terrible. It's just freaking me out a little bit because black could have taken on c6 for sure, because now his intention is, bam, king d7. Kind of, the notes are a little confusing because now A3 says he was still in theory here, even though before he said he didn't know what to do. In any case, knight f3, it's hard to imagine that this is theory. And then he mentions a game where he had against the GM where he played knight ce2 instead of knight f3. Okay, here we go. Rook f8, knight e5, and here's where I kind of lose the thread of understanding it myself. Because knight e5, maybe this is still some theoretical thing too, but to me this looks very dangerous, and by all means that's got to be a terrible move, because you are getting rid of that dark square bishop, and then all of a sudden the dark squares are a disaster for black, in particular these two guys. So I didn't, you know what? I'm just, no, you got to take it though. Right. So already in this position, the theory, the theory of 1A3 is proving amazing here. Because it's true. If you got knight f3, knight e5, and I guess he had this position before, it's a good example in openings that it's not, you know, playing the computer's best move. It's coming up with some position where you know a little bit of the tricks. And definitely A3 had it here. And I would say completely winning now. Because, yeah, that C5 square. Good. And he says he's a pawn grabber with queen A7. It's still got to be okay to play this. And you went back. Maybe you didn't need to go back, but you're still crushing it here. Like we talked about in a similar position, you you've got the dark squares and you have the initiative. And it's maybe the next move is the beginning of the crime. And I didn't plan it this way, but you and Tim did a thing here. So you said to yourself, I'm up material, and so now I want to trade stuff off. And I think you're still much better after that. Excuse me. But your advantage isn't the pawn here. Well, it's one of your advantages is the pawn. I feel like your main advantage is your king position. It's crushing, right? So I don't think black's going to survive this if you play like castles and start attacking his king. I'm going to say no way, absolutely no way. You've got the dark squares. You've got the initiative on those squares. He doesn't really have anything on the light squares. So here we go. Are you still much better? Yes. Bishop A3. Now, one thing we should say about this is it's gotten a little hectic. But the simplistic plan, if you wanted to just play for an endgame, I guess, would be rook g1, or take on e6, rook g1, and then either castle long or just start nailing going forward with the a pawn. And I gotta say you're winning. Okay, bishop a3. I still think you're much better, but now you're doing it. You clearly lost time, and you lost the g pawn, and you got this f2 rook problem. Castles. And h4, and now he tricks you here with rook takes d2. And now I guess you offer to draw here because the game is over. And black took it. And one interesting thing here is I guess he might well take the thing. And the reason is that his position is still very problematic, and it's actually a great example. There's several endgame studies actually that look at positions like this with the passed a pawn, and you're down 1,000. You have some other problem, like in this case, you've got two connected passers to deal with. But this position, right, is very difficult for black to. I don't know if he's lost, but he's got problems, right? So, anyways, maybe a small chastisement for not going forward in this position, but we can recognize, right, that you were probably shaken by the fact that you missed several tactics, and that, of course, is, anybody can miss the tactics. Like I said, it's not the tactics that I'm going to yell at you about. It's the time, and right, you gave up a lot of time in the pursuit of trading stuff, and maybe some other misconceptions. Okay, let's leave it there. We're coming up to Thad. All right, let's see what we got. We got a couple more games left, and I gotta start looking to close it out. All right, Thad is playing black, and we get an exchange variation. I think this, if you want to play against the against this knight f3, which, by the way, if someone wants to play the exchange of knight f3, you will get an interesting game. Black will make it interesting for you, and with bishop d6, black is doing that here too. Let me just give some advice to the French players. When you see this position, you could say to yourself, "Oh, my soul is dead. There's nothing to do." In fact, it always evolves into something very spicy, and you don't necessarily need to make it spicy with bishop d6. c4 is a good retort, and your bishop on d6 is a little bit funnily placed after that. But bishop d3, I've found, is also interesting. I've experimented with this as black myself, and here's my word to the wise here. The plan for white needs to be, okay, let's say the plan for black. The plan for black is knight bc6, queen d7, castles long, and then mate him. Just mate him over there, right? You might play h5, you probably play f6, g5. And so what white needs to understand pronto here is that we are in a race. And he does do it eventually, but it's going to take way too much time doing it. So it's not immediately intuitive, but there's going to be a race basically for white to get to the queen side. So a move like c3 might feel slow, but what you're doing is you're starting the drama, and the knight is usually going to come to b3, and we're going to start pressing. And especially when that knight goes to c6, we're going to use that knight to kick him out. Now, as I said earlier, in volatile positions, small mistakes are generally the end of the world. And to me, bishop g5 is a terrible move because in these positions, black usually wants to play f6 anyway. So, f6, he ends up waiting. Thad waits a move, but yes, f6. Queen d7, I like it. Castles, I like it. Queen c2, I don't like it because he's not recognizing that we're in a race. And so I guess I don't guess, I know that b4 is what you got to do. Now, Thad, you don't say anything here, but, well, you said h5 is a useful move. Yeah, I like g5 too, by the way. I like knight f5. This is terrible, and let's talk about it. He's not doing anything to you over there, first of all, with bishop f5 or anything. And that bishop on g4 has a useful function because it's going to make him think twice about knight b3, and he's going to need knight b3 later if he wants to mate you. And we're going to see some of that in the game. So here, I think with either g5, h5, or knight f5, you are firmly in control. I like knight f5 best. I'm going to vote for knight f5. You're firmly in control of the position. Maybe I'll take it back a little bit if I'm allowed to. That I'm not sure. I guess the only question I have about knight f5 is knight f5, h3, knight h4, hg, knight f3. Maybe white does survive there, so I take it back. g5 looks fine to me. All right, so bishop f5, a crime against time. All right, fg, probably a good move. And as you wrote, now the white king is a little safer. You see similar things in the Sicilian sometimes on the queen side, and white takes back cb because on ab he just might get mated a little easier. And it was certainly true that if you played hg, your h5, h4 stuff is going to be a lot more powerful. Now, let me say it. This is part of one of the things I preach. In opposite sides castling, the value of tempo goes up. That means the value of other things like pawn structure, pawns themselves, goes down. It's going to be who gets there first, who gets the initiative. Because once you get the initiative, all the black pieces or the white pieces are going to have to come back and huddle on the defense. Okay, strange move. You need to be doing your h5, g5s. You need to be opening them up. All right. Little weird, but I get it. And white finally noticed. White finally understood. By the way, knight b3. Very strong move here for white. One thing about white we'll criticize is he doesn't pursue... He starts doing weird stuff, like rook a2. Okay. Good. And... let's say the obvious here, that white's moves of rook a2 and g3 slowed his initiative on the queen side down, and the knight on f3 is not involved on the attack, and it's dominated by the pawns in f6 and g5. That's why the attacks on black's king probably won't work out. And so that's why you can get away with this kind of structure, because their knight, if a knight landed on c5, you can see this would be immediately over for white. But now, right, you have a chance. But a6, right, allows him to open you up. Now you've got a weakness, and I guess you're close to lost here. Interesting stuff, and then we're toast. So very interesting game, and you know that bishop d6 system, it was clear that you knew that, Thad, that you knew like some of the basic ideas, and the takeaway should be that like so many of the games today and in other times on the show, it's going to be about time, but it will especially be about time with opposite sides castling and in that kind of position that you got.